You're listening to Season 10 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 to today.
This is episode 10.19, Blood Destiny, and we're your hosts. I'm Tom, and after checking my retinas, fingerprints, voice print, and DNA, we've confirmed it. I'm a Gundam fan. Unfortunately, the condition is terminal.
And I'm Nina, new to Victory Gundam and bringing the same energy to cat caretaking that I bring to this podcast. Curiosity, obsessive research, and begrudging affection.
Not to mention getting really into something that started out with me asking you to do it as a favor.
It's funny, but he's right. Mobile Suit Breakdown is made possible by our paying subscribers on Patreon. Thank you all, and special thanks to our newest patrons, Password Cat, Dr. X0079, and Voff Malkavian. You keep MSB Genki. Have you heard that Tom wrote an audio drama? The disappearances of Lydia Fontaine follows Lydia and her friends, lovelorn Ethan and wannabe influencer Dee, as they try to uncover the secrets of Lydia's identity, survive the feud over her inheritance, and unravel the mysteries of her grandfather's supernatural dominions. The pilot episode is available at lydiadisappears.com. That's LYDIA disappears.com. It's fully voice-acted, with direction by fellow podcaster and MSB guest Sarah McCostumes, and original soundscapes and music. Truly excellent production quality. If you were a fan of Titans News Network and Radio Free Shangri-La, you should give it a listen. I know I'm biased, but Tom's writing just keeps getting better, and he manages to balance all the mystery and intrigue with humor and laugh-out-loud moments. Finally, we are running a Kickstarter campaign to raise the money to make a full season. There are support tiers for every budget, and some extremely cool add-ons available. Cameo on the show, anyone? If you enjoy the pilot as much as I did and want to see where this twisty tale goes next, please contribute to the Kickstarter. Like the pilot, the link to the Kickstarter is on the webpage, lydiadisappears.com.
This week we're talking about Victory Episode 19, Shakti o Sagase, or Search for Shakti. The episode was written by Godo Kazuhiko, storyboarded by Kase Mitsuko, and directed by Tamada Hiroshi, with Seo Yasuhiro as animation director. Now, the recap.
The League Militaire has intelligence that Zanskar's Kailas Gili is being converted into an enormous beam cannon to be targeted directly at Earth. Jin Jahanam believes they must attack now, before the process is completed, and that surely the space colonies will send support, but Gomez and Uso are skeptical. The last two major fleet engagements were disastrous for the League Militaire, and there is no reason to believe a third attack would play out differently. Cast adrift when the Lean Horse was hit, Shakti, Suzy, Karlman, and Flanders can only wait, hoping to be found before their oxygen runs out. Aboard ship, Oliver and Romero take stock of the damage now that the battle is over, and, examining the hull breach, find a baby bottle and some dog hair. They immediately suspect that Shakti, Karlman, and Flanders were in that room, and are now missing. Marbet breaks the news to Uso, and he inspects the room himself. Finding Shakti's pouch of willow herb seeds, he is left with no doubts about what happened. Odello, Warren, and Uso are all in agreement. They have to organize a search. The kids from Highland readily agree, but when they go to Jin Jahanam and Captain Gomez to request that the Lean Horse helps with the search, the adults form a similarly united front. Losses are a part of war, and a reckless search would only endanger more lives. Uso and Odello exchange a quick look that says it all. They are determined to search, with or without permission. But in the meantime, Shakti and the others have been picked up by a very surprised Zanskar ship and taken to the Kailas Gili. There, an officer runs identity checks on the children and makes a shocking discovery. Shakti Kareen is the biological daughter of Zanskar's queen Maria Armonia. Captain Tassilo Wago and Chronicle Asher are the only ones told, and Chronicle looks troubled as he watches Wago inform Shakti of what they've found. She can't believe it. The only mother she's ever known is the one who raised her in Casarelia, and neither Wago nor Chronicle tell her anything more. Uso, his friends from Earth, and the kids from Highland make a plan to sneak 2 small ships, the Aeneas and the captured Sinope, now dubbed the Fishbone, and 2 mobile suits, Uso's Victory Gundam and a captured Zoloat, out for the search. Marbet and Oliver, watching from a distance, expected something like this, and decide to keep an eye on things but not to interfere unless the kids need help. Junko agrees and readies the remaining Shrikes. Once out in space, Uso is at a loss. How do they search such a vast area? And before long, one of the ship's scanners picks up a small Zanskar force incoming. With their captured Sinope and Zoloat, Uso and Tomasz are hoping to talk their way out of it and get away without fighting. But, unwilling to take the risk, Odello takes matters into his own hands and fires a handheld rocket launcher at the Zanskar mobile suits. The Aeneas launches a flotilla of dummies, inflatables that, from a distance, resemble ships, mobile suits, and asteroids. And the mobile suits disperse Minovsky particles. But their tricks and maneuvers aren't enough, and when the Victory takes a nasty kick from an enemy mobile suit, their situation looks dire. Despite his reluctance to kill, Uso soon realizes he can't hold anything back. If he wants to live to find Shakti, if he wants to protect the other kids, who are only in this mess because they wanted to help him, then he cannot hesitate. With Uso's renewed ferocity and all of them working together, the search party has managed to swing the skirmish in their favor by the time Oliver, Marbet, and the Shrikes arrive for backup. And when the kids return to angry reprimands and threats of punishment, Marbet convinces Jahanam to let her handle it in unit. On the Kailas Gili, Wago orders Lieutenant Chronicle to escort the princess to the Zanskar homeland, and Shakti frets about the fate of Earth.
They cannot keep doing this to me. This show is really putting me through it.
What have they done now?
You remember last week how I talked all about how they spell the name of the Aeneas shuttle in kind of a weird way, but that raises the possibility that actually they're referencing a different mythological figure who might be tied in with the Sinope as connected to mythic founders of cities in Turkey, that whole deal?
Yeah.
Okay, well, in this episode, they just changed the spelling of Aeneas back to the standard one. I don't know if the first episode was a typo or what, but they can't keep doing this to me. They can't just change the spelling in the middle like this.
Oh, no. See, I think they are trying to remain consistent. For basically every important name, we've been given at least 2 spellings.
Uig, Wuig, or Praha. Uso, Eben, Ebbing, Evan, Ewan.
Jahanam and Janaham.
I was reading about him the other day, actually, and apparently the Janaham spelling is used consistently in the Comic Bonbon manga adaptation of Victory.
Okay.
So that's something to incorporate into your analysis of this character, I guess. Maybe there's actually 2 different ships. One is the Aeneas and one is the Aeneas. And then there's the Fishbone, number 3. It's funny that Uso asks them if he can borrow the Fishbone when the Fishbone is the Sinope that he captured. Like, did they give it to the Highland as a gift?
Did they modify it in some way? Because it doesn't look...
Well, they painted it.
Is the Fishbone the Sinope or is the... Wait, the Aeneas was the one that they had been building.
Right. It's the one that kind of looks like a snail because it's got the big, like, rounded shell on its back.
But the Fishbone doesn't look like a Sinope. What else? They did something else to it. It's too elongated.
It only looks elongated because it doesn't have mobile suits attached to it.
Oh.
Yeah, the mobile suits totally changed the silhouette of the thing.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes. That makes sense. Well, embarrassing as that is for me, I'm glad it came up because I was definitely confused about the names and provenance of these various ships.
Well, Uso's comment about needing to borrow it certainly doesn't help. It makes it sound like it was just hanging out on the highland like the Aeneas and the Aeneas.
Or like it was another ship that they had made themselves.
But beyond that infuriating little detail that absolutely ruins the show completely for me, I thought this was a pretty good episode. And I especially appreciated that they do something here with the Stowaway storyline that you can really only do with a Stowaway storyline. I mean, so often when you get stowaways in an adventure story like this one, the ultimate payoff of the story doesn't really rely on them having been stowaways. Like, Odello and Warren get revealed, within 10 seconds of getting onto that shuttle, and then they're just there, right? But here, so much of the tension at the very beginning and that delicious tension between episodes, between the cliffhanger of last week and the beginning of this week, is our awareness that not only are Shakti and company lost in space, but also no one knew they were there in the first place. So no one can launch a rescue mission in a timely fashion because, as stowaways, they're invisible people.
And in the long run, sort of looking forward to future episodes, it sets up some really interesting tension. Because we end the episode with Uso thinking about the fact that the Ligue Militaire is preparing another major attack on the Kailas Gili, but that's probably where Shakti is. That if she was picked up by anyone, it's probably them.
And they're talking about not just a raid, not just an attack, but like long-range microwave beam destruction. Jin Jahanam is proposing a method of assault that would not leave a lot of options for a high-stakes dramatic rescue. Perhaps it foreshadows Uso going rogue again to try to break into the fleet and get his little sister back.
And it's established from the beginning of the episode that while the odds might not be great, Jahanam does not think that the likelihood of success is going to improve over time. That their best bet is to attack now, because they cannot let the Kailas Gili finish converting itself into this massive beam cannon.
And it does seem like a significant portion of the fleet is required for this combination procedure. JJ doesn't actually say that that's why now is the moment to attack, but when Tassila Wago dispatches Chronicle with the Amalthea in the previous episode, there is a sense that, like, these are the only ships we can spare. All of the other ones are necessary either for guard duty or tug duty or something like that. When JJ first suggests that they launch another fleet attack, and Gomez is like, haven't we done that before? With catastrophic results? Haven't we sent many soldiers to their deaths doing this? Jin's response is, yeah, but if we strike now, then we'll win the sympathy of the other colonies and they'll come to our side, and glorious victory for the Ligue Militaire. Uso likens him to the rebels who were trying to rally people's spirits in that train station refugee shelter in Uig, shortly before they were all massacred. And they were also talking about, like, comrades, stay the course. If we just fight on a little bit longer, our plight will be recognized by the other space colonies and they'll send their forces to our aid.
Thing is, while that is obviously, worst case scenario wishful thinking, and even in the best case scenario, probably over optimistic, he may not be wrong that they can't afford to wait. Sometimes, even if the conditions are bad, your best chance is still now.
Well, I think some of the great irony of Jin Jahanam is that he's a very unappealing person, but a lot of what he says makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, coming from almost anyone else, his little speech about how there are always losses in war and a reckless search can put more people in danger, put more people at risk, lose them more lives. That's absolutely true. No part of that is incorrect. He's just so unappealing and so unsympathetic that we don't want to hear it.
I was revisiting the production history that Mark Simmons put together about Victory and was reminded that Jin Jahanam's original character design was rejected on the grounds that it was too seedy, too despicable looking.
Oh,
too
dear.
unctuous and unappealing. So the Jin Jahanam that we got is like toned down. This is the mellowed out version.
Wow.
And yeah, like, he's a weird, fun contrast because he's not really wrong. Like, there's a lot of logic to what he says, but he's also pretty useless himself. Like, his lack of contribution is underscored throughout this whole episode by showing what everybody else is doing. Like, even Gomez, the nominal captain of the vessel, is helping out with the maintenance. There's like a little shot of him and Uso, physically the two of them maneuvering the Gundam's giant rifle into position for like maintenance work on it. He's helping out. Everybody helps out. Oliver commands the strike team, but he still goes out and fights in the front line of the battle. Except JJ.
Well, and a fair portion of the other adult's job, and in particular Gomez, seems to be managing Jahanam.
Managing up.
Yeah.
I kept thinking of that term during our watch of this episode.
He backs Jahanam up to the kids when the kids first come forward to propose a search and rescue operation. But then at the end, Marbet is there to say, like, oh, let us handle this internally. And he backs Marbet up.
Mm-hmm.
And then distracts Jahanam with the news that, we may be able to convert the Highland into some sort of microwave weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Which puts Jahanam in a good mood and stops him thinking about how annoyed he is at those kids.
The kids are able to do things that the adults are not, but the adults are still necessary to run cover for the kids. There is a sympathetic relationship between the two of them.
There is a strong, like, check it out, there are some good adults vibe to Marbet and Oliver, and to some degree Gomez.
And Junko.
Yeah, the
The old man
Shrikes.
Polycule.
Yeah, in this episode in particular.
I mean, JJ in particular is remarkable for showing up and being just a standard Gundam adult in a series full of very unusual ones.
There was a moment that felt very contradictory to me on my first watch through of this episode, and that's that Marbet comes and tells Uso, hey, we think Shakti and Susie and Karlman and the dog Flanders stowed away on the lean horse and now they're missing. And then once he goes and confirms it, she's like, wait, what are you doing? Stop! No! And my initial reaction is, well, then why did you tell him? You know Uso. You know what he's like. If you didn't want him to behave in this way, why would you tell him? I didn't get it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's that she's doing him the respect of being honest with him. It never occurs to her to not be honest with him. She's not trying to manage him. She's not trying to manipulate him into a course of behavior. She doesn't want him to risk himself unnecessarily. She wants to encourage him to think things through, to be less impetuous, which we know has always been his problem. But she's not going to do that in like an underhanded or manipulative kind of way.
It feels like a very respectful way to treat someone who is partly a child, but also partly an adult. And like, then she and Oliver, they don't push the kids to do anything. They just sit back and watch. And they know that these kids are going to do something because they know these kids. It's not like Bright trying to entrap Judo into the Zeta or something.
Or vice versa, the numerous times adults in Gundam are surprised by the behavior of kids who they really ought to know better.
I feel like Uso's criticism of Jin Jahanam's willingness to make these kinds of suicidal but symbolically meaningful attacks comes from a kind of criticism of people who let the ideology of the cause overrule common sense, or people who let the big picture crowd out the small one. Because lots of people in the Ligue Militaire are willing to risk their lives and spend their lives for the sake of the cause. But they're willing to spend their lives, not someone else's lives.
Exactly.
Not spending lives like water for the sake of some symbolic gain. And that, I think, is where the show is going by showing how directly involved in the work and the fighting that everybody else is. Everyone else contributes both blood and sweat to this struggle.
I will say, destroying the Kailas Gili would not be purely symbolic if they could actually manage it.
But another fleet attack when every previous one has failed, right?
Right. I mean, the big issue here is not so much that core idea itself, but one, that Jahannam does not have any kind of an idea for how to do this in a more effective way. He doesn't have a plan. He's not a tactician. He's not saying, but what if we try XYZ instead this time? And two, like you said, he is so far removed from the fighting. He is so rarely at risk himself.
And when he is even slightly at risk, he goes completely to pieces, as we saw at the end of the prior episode.
And he doesn't seem to be weighing the potential loss of life. He doesn't seem to be valuing the lives of his subordinates.
And his plan to attract the sympathy of the other colonies, it's not specific. He doesn't really have a plan for how that's going to work. He just kind of hopes that it will if they show their fighting spirit. It's not like, the politicians in Side 4 are dithering, but I believe we can bring them over with a show of force and a successful battle. This isn't like, trying to entice the French to join the American War of Independence with a stunning victory at Saratoga or whatever. It's all just vibes. Uso's reluctance to fight seriously, to kill people, kind of comes out of nowhere, doesn't it? It's not that he's never shown those tendencies before, but they have been inconsistent, and they really ramp up in this episode to a level that we've never seen before.
I wouldn't say never. I thought it felt quite reminiscent of some of his earliest fights. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which fights I'm thinking of, but a lot of the lines were more or less the same. Like, I don't want to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
I think in particular because when he set out, this wasn't supposed to be a battle. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. The plan was for this to be a peaceful mission. They weren't going to run into any patrols. They weren't going to have to kill anybody. This was supposed to be a good rescue, net positive.
I guess it's a little bit in line with when he gave those oxygen canisters to Godwald. Like, some space mariner is in distress, and we're trying to rescue them, and this is not a combat mission. I guess I understand it in those terms.
And that this wasn't the plan. And that it's still hard for him to reach the point of being willing or able to kill someone else deliberately unless he feels like he's protecting someone he cares about or like he really is fighting for his life.
I guess I was thrown a little bit in this episode because he is fighting to protect his little band. In fact, they're in significantly more dire circumstances than they've been in many previous battles because, yes, Uso is there in the victory, but his only backup is a basically unarmed Fishbone and Tomash, who surprisingly competent pilot in that mobile suit, but has probably never been in a mobile suit before this.
And who is, it turns out, much more competent group commander than Uso is.
Well, Tomash is like the eldest of the gang of kids on the Highland. He probably has a lot of experience wrangling them. Uso just knows computers. Uso just played Call of Duty all day.
And it is ultimately protecting the group that pulls Uso out of that resistance, I think. But he and Tomash both intended to try and talk their way out of this, it looked like. Mm-hmm. They were waiting, hoping they could talk their way out of it. And then Odello forces their hand. I'm not convinced Odello is wrong, except that he acts unilaterally.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the advantage of the first strike is that, they're not expecting it, so it's more likely to work.
But he didn't actually effectively do anything.
He also just, he shot a bazooka at a mobile suit in space, and it dodged.
Odello is at his happiest holding a bazooka.
God, he does like to have gun. but he would love to have Gundam.
Wouldn't everybody?
I think this is the first time he has expressed that kind of jealousy, that he would like to have a mobile suit like Uso. And isn't it interesting what motivates those feelings for him?
Well, so it's kind of hilarious that given Odello's experiences of the past couple, let's call them weeks, he thinks it's men's job to protect women.
Well, look, he's young, he is a teenage boy, he has a huge crush, he is full of hormones he doesn't understand, and he wants to do violence to impress girls. We've all been there.
He's also more or less stating aloud one of the major themes of Gundam since First Gundam, that the mobile suits are an instrument to empower disempowered young people.
Mm-hmm.
To help them fight for and protect what they believe in.
And this is more subtext, but that the mobile suit represents the transition into adulthood. That Odello has met a girl. He wants to impress her. He wants to date her. He wants to do all the things that adult men do with adult women. And he wants the mobile suit to enable all of that. And for him, the capacity to do violence, to protect, but to fight, is the essential component of masculinity. And masculinity is judged in the eyes of women. He doesn't want a mobile suit just to protect his friends. He doesn't want a mobile suit to impress the other boys. He wants to have a mobile suit because he thinks that being able to protect Alicia will make her love him.
I'm not entirely certain I agree with you, mainly because he has no idea what Alicia wants. If she wants to be protected, if she wants any of that, she might say she doesn't. She might be totally indifferent. This is about his personal construction of masculinity that has nothing to do with like what she wants or actually needs.
Yeah, masculinity.
Right. So what I'm saying is it's actually has nothing to do with how she views it, with how women view it.
I'll grant you it bears only the most tangential connection to how she actually views it, but it is inextricable from how he thinks that she views it. It is the simulacrum of her living in his head that he is trying to live up to.
As opposed to some idea of masculinity that was conveyed to him by other men that he absorbed over the course of his young life.
I mean, I'm sure that's a big part of why he thinks that doing violence is the key to her heart. But within this scene, it's framed around his desire to impress her, his desire to woo her.
We may just have to agree to disagree about whether Odello's conception of masculinity has to do with how he thinks he'll be perceived by women or how he thinks he'll be perceived by men. But the point about mobile suits stands.
Whatever the motivations are, the mobile suit lies at the crux of Odello's ideas about masculinity.
What I loved about this storyline of the group of kids here, because the Highland kids don't have to help. It's not as though Uso and Odello and Warren have something on them and can make them do it, right? This is entirely voluntary.
They've never even met Shakti.
But the group of kids all working together are a demonstration of how Earthnoids and Spacenoids can work together, can teach each other, have things to contribute to each other in a way that none of the adults who are crossing those boundaries or attempting to do very successfully. You know, on the one hand, we have Tomasz making sure Uso knows about the gravity well, which Uso has very little space flight or space combat experience. He had no idea. Uso is teaching Tomasz about mobile suits and their abilities.
And they do that really cool, like, coordinated maneuver at the end.
Oh, so great.
Where Tomasz, like, shoots the wires from his Zoloat into the rotor on the shield of the Victory so that Uso can do this, like, really huge spinning distraction thing. I thought that was so cool. And it's all shot, like it's composed from the perspective of the Bespa pilots. The Gundam moves so quickly that it vanishes and then suddenly it's there. It's like a horror movie.
And then Carol, I don't know how, I don't
Carel?
quite.
I'm not sure.
Has this moment where first he's talking about how Odello is acting high, which can mean intoxicated or, you know, he's acting weird.
We should clarify, he uses the loan word high, which means high and can mean intoxicated.
But when Odello starts talking to him about, well, this ship must have missiles, come on. The pilot kid from Highland is like, oh, we can fight back. Like, this is revelatory to him. Oh, we're not just sitting ducks. We don't just have to wait to see what happens or run away. We can actually fight back. We can take action, which is a thing Odello has been doing.
Yeah, this is an everyday thing for Odello. Anytime you get into a new vehicle, immediately figure out where the missile launchers are. It's so stupid that the UI for the Fishbone requires you to manually type in missiles in order to access the missile launcher.
It's probably like a DOS system.
Probably. It reminds me of, did you ever see that? It was like a graphic design or UI design contest to make the worst possible age selector menu.
Oh, I've seen a few of these. There was a volume one that was really terrible.
Yep. I feel like there was one that was like, there were like 100 of these different ones submitted by different designers, and every one worse than the last. It feels like that. Imagine if you were maneuvering and you had to type in right, enter, or left, enter, anytime you wanted to adjust the heading of your ship.
For the young'uns among you, DOS is an older computer system where you, the user, would have to type in the commands of what you wanted the computer to do. There was no graphical interface like we use now. You were just accessing and looking at code and entering in pre-coded commands or creating your own commands or...
Though it could run graphical programs, like you could be in DOS and you could, CD / and go to the folder that you wanted and then type, run darkforces.exe.
But the main way in which you, the user, operated the computer was to type in commands of what you wanted the computer to do.
I think it was MS-DOS. It was like Microsoft Disk Operating System. Is I believe what it stands for. Anyway, yes.
And yeah, in the early 90s, probably a lot of computers still ran on DOS.
I feel like there has to be something to the fact that all of the Highland kids are siblings, and both Odello and Uso are looking for their surrogate little sisters. There's a bit about this between Martina and Alicia where they're like, why is Uso going so crazy about this? And like, oh, it's because he's looking for a girl that he considers to be his little sister. And that makes sense to them. That explains it. I also feel like this whole Shakti lost in space, kidnapped by the enemy, rescued really by the enemy, falling into their custody, then being given like special treatment, and Uso trying to find her, struggling to do so, probably going to be a recurring plot element in future episodes as he continues to try to get Shakti back. Doesn't it all feel like a do-over of the Judo Lena thing?
I suppose sort of. It was not a parallel that occurred to me really, but maybe.
We'll keep an eye on it. I guess if Shakti dies, quote, dies, we'll know to watch out for a switcheroo. Maybe 100-year-old cyborg Sayla will appear out of nowhere to rescue her.
Though it doesn't come out very explicitly, I do think the Earthnoid-Spacenoid divide is a pretty major part of this episode. Did you notice how often the Earth and or the Moon appear in the backgrounds of shots?
I didn't really. I just remember Odello being like, I can't see anything because of the Earth.
Nah, there's so many shots in this episode where it's like, here's the Earth, here's the Earth, here's the Moon, here's the, like, they're very present. And part of that is simply where we're located, but other than a certain amount of establishing shots, it felt like they were much more present in this episode than they usually are. Oh, and actually, vis-a-vis the sibling thing, there are two Uso Shakti moments that get special cutaways. The first is when he finds the willow herb seeds in the cabin where Shakti and the rest of them had been hiding.
Ugh, such a good moment. Such a good payoff to a running plot thread that I had assumed they had forgotten about. But the willow herb seeds as the link that allows theoretically their parents to follow them wherever they go now becomes the thing that allows Uso to know that Shakti is missing, to follow her.
But at the same time, he has this memory, this vision of her scattering them in a sort of hazy field of green. And then we see the seeds scattering through space where we know there is no chance any of them will ever sprout or be alive or become anything. The deadliness of this environment, the emptiness of it, contrasted with the sort of abundant green farm life that they had on Earth.
A lot of Tomino science fiction work is actually about how much it would suck to live in space. Like, it's not a utopian future to imagine all those space colonies.
That she is this space princess who was raised on Earth and now is captive aboard a ship that is going to do massive harm to Earth, the only place she cares about. I mean, I won't say only, but her home, the place she cares very deeply about and feels a deep connection to.
We have been told that Shakti has a special connection to the Earth. I feel like that was in pre-release promotional material for this show.
And then during the fight, in the moment when usually we would see Uso land a really cool hit on an enemy, but instead the enemy gets him. And it kind of snaps him out of his resistance to really fighting 100%. Because he's just been thinking about how he needs to protect people, but he hasn't felt himself in danger yet. Then he takes this hit and he does. Cut to Haro showing probably yet another pair of siblings on the highland, it looks like. A video of Shakti and Flanders running through, again, green fields.
And there's an insert song. You know, whenever there's an insert song, that you are watching a very important scene.
The video of Shakti running through fields actually made me think of First Gundam and those visions of Sayla and Char running through like alpine fields, meadows.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was Sayla. Maybe it was Lala. Maybe they were just abstract concepts. I don't think we ever worked out for certain who we thought those were.
Well, children.
Yeah.
Some children running through
the psychic fields of space.
Right, but it's always an Earth environment, right? It's always someplace green and beautiful.
We belong to the Earth.
There's never buildings. It's never a town or a city. Just children and nature. And the insert song is a bit sad.
Yeah.
A bit poignant.
Well, it's a song, the lyrics are about kids like going off on a journey, but it feels like it's about kids growing up, no longer being kids, and the kind of inherent sweet sadness in that. That it plays here when Uso kind of makes the transition from being reluctant to fight to realizing that he needs to, and with Shakti being captured. And I think this is around when Tassilo Wago tells Chronicle to take Shakti to the homeland. For both of them, this moment may represent the end of their childhood, a final separation from the innocence of youth. Certainly both of them have been separated from Haro, who has, in the past, represented youth and childhood and innocence. Haro, as we see here, is passed on to these other younger kids, the kids who are too young to take part in all the fighting. Another character, another small, round character who continues to represent things outside of themselves, Carlman, continues to give voice to the emotions of other characters. When Shakti learns the shocking truth about her genetic origins, her biological mother, it's Carlman who starts crying and cannot be soothed. Shakti keeps it together. But Carlman has been the voice of Uso or Shakti's internal torment before.
I did find it funny that when they're drifting in space, Carlman is just kind of cooing. He's making little baby noises, but he's not crying or wailing. He doesn't seem particularly distressed. Susie is losing it.
Well, she's got it together now, but this was such a good detail, that her helmet is full of the tears that she has already cried.
And the crying that we hear when they're all drifting before they're found is Susie, not Carlman.
Carlman just thinks all the lights are very pretty.
And if you're young enough, you can adapt to space.
I don't think it works like that.
I meant more mentally. Shakti almost seems to clutch Carlman to her like a security blanket, like having him with her, having him to take care of, protects her in some way, or makes her feel safer somehow. Maybe because to some degree that is a role that she understands, and while she has that responsibility, nobody can make her do something else or be something else.
Also, the news that her mother is not only alive and also a different person than she thought, and also, like, right over there in Zanskar, you can go and meet with her. All of that actually separates Shakti from Carlman and Susie, who are both orphans. Whereas before, they were all sort of hanging together. Now Shakti is offered a different identity. Clutching to Carlman, holding on to Susie, may be a way of rejecting that.
That whole reveal is so fascinating. I think we have to go to the beginning of it when Tassilo Wago first gets the news from the scientist, like, oh, she's definitely Maria Pure Armonia's daughter. And his reaction to that is translated as something about how, she is unmarried and also a powerful psychic. And that seemed odd. Like, what do they have to do with each other? What does that have to do with this situation? So I went and looked at the Japanese, and it's a bit complex, and I can understand why translating it would have been difficult. The word that he uses for the ability to sense the supernatural, reikan, can also mean inspiration. And so he says, someone of surpassing ability to sense the supernatural, or somebody of surpassing inspiration. And the way the sentence is constructed, it indicates that her being unmarried is one source of that, one reason for that surpassing ability. And then that this reasoning, that she derives some power, whether it be influence, social power, or like supernatural power from being unmarried, is what is kind of like known by Zanskar. Like, well, everybody knows, everybody says, everybody assumes. The implication here being that, everybody thinks XYZ, everybody thinks, and I think we can make the leap from unmarried to virginal. Everybody thinks that she derives this power from her unmarried state, but actually she has a secret love child.
I mean, I don't think it's going to be surprising to anybody that Otomi no work is deeply interested in gender, capital G, as a main theme. And I think at various points he has said that Victory is like about women and soil, which sure is interesting given the context of everything we've said about Earth so far. We get in this episode a pretty good view of the Kailas Gili as it's coming together, all of these different components, and it is deeply phallic. Like,
I described it as a squiggly wiggly eldritch horror space squid.
But that's only the main shaft-like component. There are other components which, taken together, create an overwhelming sense of masculine energy.
A phallus, perhaps?
It's also shaped like a Vajra, which is a symbol of male fertility and also destructive power. Weird that those two go together. Hi, Odello. Anyway, and that it's going to, like, fire its devastating beams of masculine energy at the Mother Earth, and Zanskar being, like, all organized around the matriarch, the maternal figure, the great spiritual mother. Not only is it like, oh, she's unmarried, oh, she's a virgin, but I think it's like her rejection of men, her almost monastic lifestyle as this pure shamaness.
It did occur to me that the idea that she derives her power from being unmarried might be an idea she put around to avoid being forced into a marriage.
Yeah, kind of a Queen Elizabeth I kind of thing.
But also that it now sets up this contrast between the sort of antiseptic maiden queen and her connections to this very warlike society, her connections to destruction, versus the Earth-raised princess and her connection to growing things and productivity and abundance.
Well, like with the willow herb seeds, the contrast between the fecund earth and the sterile, infertile space. Last episode, we raised the possibility that there was a kind of a trinity going on. Maria becomes the mother, the spirit, the space essence, and then in contrast, Shakti, the child, the earth princess, the embodied physical manifestation.
It's a bit of an odd inversion that Maria is literally Shakti's mother, but Maria is the maiden and Shakti is the mother of the, if you want to go, maiden mother crone.
Well, and not only that, Maria is the mother of Zanskar, who abandoned her actual child. And Shakti, the child of Earth, who, like...
adopted a baby.
And a dog, and another kid, and, like...
who has this massive capacity for caretaking.
I strongly suspect there is also a racial component to all of this that we don't yet know enough about to, like, talk seriously, but Shakti is very brown. Maria is white. And most of the people in Zanskar appear to be white, but also...
we've seen a few black officers, I think, and pilots.
True, but, like, lots of white people, especially in the leadership class.
Yeah.
Yet their empire is named for a place in India. Their ships are styled like Hindu ceremonial objects. So the question is, like, is Zanskar an authentic representation of the cultures from which it borrows its iconography? Or is Zanskar like a consciously orientalizing project to steal and repurpose that iconography and those ideologies? Is Zanskar, in fact, a matriarchy, or is Zanskar actually a patriarchy?
With a woman as their figurehead.
Exactly. And the way Shakti undermines Mariaism in this episode strongly suggests that all of Zanskar may be built on a tissue of lies.
Wago clearly has some kind of a plan. Or if he's not sure yet what he wants to do.
He recognizes the possibilities.
He knows he needs to keep this mostly secret, keep it close to the vest until he's made a decision about what he wants to do with the information. And the way in which Wago tries to seem kindly just raised my hackles so much.
Yeah, he, it feels like from the moment he gets the news, he immediately, the possibilities of this revelation open up before him. Or he just has, like, resting creep face.
Well, I mean, him telling her there's no need for you to understand. So patronizing. So patronizing. The way
but is that the baseline of being patronizing to children, or is that a special, elevated level of patronizing?
I think that's a normal societal level of patronizing to children, but also that he kneels down so he can look in her eyes when he talks to her, and that he pats poor little crying Karlman on the head, and it all feels so fake.
And Karlman can tell. Karlman only cries harder when Tassilo tries to calm him.
For his part, Chronicle looks deeply troubled.
Sad. I thought he looked sad.
Possibly worried.
I think Chronicle realizes that this is not going to do Shakti any good. That the life of a member of the Zanskar royal family is not a particularly pleasant one. Nor easy, nor safe.
Well, there's also that photo that we saw early on. He may not have recognized Shakti when he saw her on Earth, but now that he knows who she is...
He's got to be putting a couple of things together.
He may even know the reason why she was left on Earth, whether it was because this was a scandalous thing to have happen for his sister to give birth unmarried, in the same way that, you know, often families might give up a child for adoption or have that child raised as, like, another family member, not as, like, your younger sister or your cousin or whatever. He may have been party to this whole plan and execution of the plan, and so to have it foiled now when they thought they were doing the right thing for whatever reason, and presumably he understands that it puts his sister in a difficult position and potentially puts her at risk.
And, like, he's being civil, but he has no reason to trust or like Tassilo Wago. He has every reason to think this guy is extremely scary and dangerous. And now Shakti is in his power? Bad. Bad outcome.
And, you know, any sense of relief we might feel when Wago is like, oh, you should take the princess to the Zanskar homeland. You know, on the plus side, it means she won't physically be in his power, but on the downside, probably means he's trying to force a scandal. If Chronicle shows up with this young girl, what is going to happen?
Or, see, I don't think he's trying to force a scandal. I don't think he works like that. I think this is a message to Maria. I know. I, Tassilo Wago, know. You know, just gonna leave that there.
And Chronicle's resistance is less about, oh, I want to stay and finish this Earth operation, and more about, I would like to buy my sister some time. Maybe I can get word to her ahead of this if I don't have to leave right now.
I don't know how many people in the audience noticed this, but Tassilo Wago's, lounge where he's hanging out and watching the construction of the Kailas Gili on his big screen TV is almost a carbon copy of Char's lounge from Char's Counterattack. He's even got the tray with the bottle of whiskey and the tumblers. Even down to the same armchair with the same print on it. It's identical.
Do you think they're repros, or do you think he, bought up antique Char stuff?
Oh, man. I think Tassilo Wago is the type to buy the originals. I think that might be Char's actual chair, with Char's actual farts still in it. So, one, I guess it's entirely possible that this is just reusing existing background designs. Short on money, short on time, why not? I know they have definitely reused background designs before, that's not uncommon, but it's so similar that I feel like it has to be on purpose. It has to be there to consciously or subconsciously connect Tassilo Wago to Char's Counterattack era Char. And that they would do that in the episode where a young girl, potentially with powerful psychic abilities, falls into his power, and he then has a whole plan to take advantage of that somehow, while presenting himself to her as a friendly protector figure. That feels meaningful. That feels like that was done on purpose. Tassilo, I was thinking about this, he needs, a loyal second. He needs somebody to play off of. Chronicle doesn't do the job. And every
He
Gundam...
needs a Goten. He needs a...
Yeah. He needs a... Rambaral had Clamp. Makuve had Uragang. Farah had Mechet. Dozel had Lecoq. Everybody has their loyal lackey who can say yes sir, no sir to them. And the interplay between the main villain and their loyal henchmen is so important for establishing characterization. The fact that Tassilo doesn't have one, and that makes him such an outlier, is is this guy so unlikable he can't even find one henchman? Is this guy so cruel that he just disposes of them one after another? What's his deal? Besides being a Char Aznable superfan and cosplayer.
I think on some level, he just might not be a person who has relationships with any other people. And now Tom's research on the possible visual inspiration for the Shrike team.
I wanted to take advantage of the recap episode 2 weeks ago to return to one of the topics we've covered already this season, the Shrike team. But then I ran out of time while I was doing the research, so it had to get delayed, and now I don't have a good way to tie it into the events of this week's episode. So here it is. It's Shrike Week on MSB. Nina already talked about the famous musicians who lent the team their names. Now I want to talk about the inspiration behind their visual design. When character designer Osaka Hiroshi sat down to begin sketching the battle-hardened warrior women of the Shrike team, he was guided by a specific concept for the unit handed down by the director. The Shrikes were to resemble a women's volleyball team. Tall, athletic, and young, they all looked to be in their early to mid-20s, they fit this concept to a T. There was even some promotional art of the group dressed in volleyball uniforms in the October 1993 issue of Animedia. I imagine many of you have seen it before. Osaka did not specify whether Tomino's vision for the team was based on a particular volleyball team or just the generic idea of one. I think that there's a good chance Tomino did have a particular team in mind. But first, let's get some context. Volleyball, shortened to bare, is remarkably popular in Japan, especially for women. A 2023 white paper by the Sasakawa Sports Foundation reported that, based on the number of players registered with the relevant national governing body, volleyball was the 5th most popular sport in the country, behind football, the soccer kind, golf, basketball, and track and field. Based on estimates of total participation, registered and otherwise, it would be the 8th most popular. Of all the sports surveyed, volleyball was one of only 3 that had more women registered than men. The other 2 were badminton and aerobics. Among women, volleyball was the most popular sport, with more women registered than any other sport. Likewise, among high school athletes participating in school sports clubs, volleyball was the most popular for girls, with more than 57,000 players, and the 6th most popular for boys. A 2021 survey estimated that the total number of people, registered or not, playing volleyball at least once a year was approximately 4 million, representing about 22% of teenagers and 2.3% of adults. 2.3% might not sound like much, but keep in mind that adult sport participation is generally pretty abysmal. The most popular sport among adults overall was golf, with a mere 6.7% participation. Roughly as many adults play volleyball as rugby, boxing, rowing, surfing, karate, and judo combined. Like most sports, volleyball's popularity in Japan has waxed and waned over the years, with periods of growing popularity usually attributable to specific events, as in 1923 when the volleyball team from Himeji Girls High School won the 6th Far East Championship in Osaka, kicking off a surge in enthusiasm for the sport among young women. When volleyball was first introduced to Japan by an instructor at the Tokyo YMCA in 1913, the official rules did not specify any particular number of players, but the practice in Japan was that each team deployed 16 players on the court at a time. Matches were extremely long, with individual players only infrequently having the opportunity to, actually do something, with so many others on the court. So by 1921, they had trimmed it down to 12 players, and then in 1927, they cut it down to 9 aside. By this point, though, most of the rest of the volleyball-playing world had already adopted the modern standard of 6 players to a side. The 9-player system became a distinctive feature of volleyball as it was played in the so-called Far East, or at least in those nations which competed in the Far Eastern Championship Games, Kyokuto Senshuken Kyogi Taikai in Japanese. These were, principally, the American-ruled Philippines, the Republic of China, and the Empire of Japan. In 1934, these nations met once again in Manila to contest the 10th Far East Championship Games, joined for this year only by the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. By this point, tensions between Japan and China were approaching a boiling point. Sport has a way of mirroring politics, especially when nations get involved, so it shouldn't be surprising that Imperial Japan and the Republic of China were butting heads over the status of Manchukuo. The empire wanted its newly established puppet state to participate. China refused to recognize Manchukuo and threatened to boycott the games if it were allowed to compete. That threat proved sufficient in the short term to keep Manchukuo out of the 1934 games, but Japan was not ready to concede the point. This wasn't about giving the hard-working athletes of Manchukuo a chance to compete on the world stage. This was a diplomatic ploy to manufacture international recognition for the new puppet. As soon as the competition ended, the Japanese delegation called for a revision of the statutes of the Far Eastern Athletics Association, the game's governing body, so that Manchukuo could be invited to future iterations of the games. Well, not quite as soon as the competition ended. First, they waited for the Indonesian delegation to leave, because the rules stated that any statutory revision required the assent of 2/3 of the participating delegations. With Indonesia gone and the Philippines cooperative, Japan was able to amend the rules to approve Manchukuo's membership. China protested, and they were set to host the next championship, so they had a bit of leverage. They announced that they would not, under any circumstances, be inviting Manchukuo to participate. The next day, less than a week after the end of the 10th Far Eastern Championship Games, Japan and the Philippines voted to abolish the Games and its governing body, and they created a new body with Manchukuo but without China. Japan would then host the next, 11th competition in 1938. But by 1938, Japan was in the middle of invading China, and the spirit of international solidarity among Asians that had animated the Far East Asian Championship Games when they started back in 1913 had met its unfortunate end on the bayonet of empire. So the 1938 Games were cancelled. Japan then tried to replace it with their own East Asian Games. These were contested in 1940 and 1942, but the 1942 Games might as well have been called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere Games, because besides the empire itself, only Japanese-occupied China, Japanese-occupied Inner Mongolia, and Manchukuo sent teams. They had invited French Indochina, the Philippines, Burma, and Thailand, but this was, low-key, kind of a really funny thing to do, because at that moment, the empire was actively invading/occupying all 4 of the invitees, and enthusiasm for playing volleyball against the invaders was understandably pretty low. In any event, there would be no more tournaments of this kind until after the end of the war and Japan's capitulation. Throughout the 3-decade-long life of the Far East Asian Championship Games, the Japanese men's volleyball team did not exactly cover itself in glory. Not to put too fine a point on it, but they sucked. They sucked so bad. They came in dead last every single time. The women's team was a different matter entirely. Women's sports didn't have the same prestige. They were only included in the games on an exhibition basis, but the Japanese women absolutely dominated the field, winning every tournament they joined and inspiring a vogue for volleyball among young women, especially among high schoolers. This surge in popularity for volleyball during the 1930s coincided with the entrance of a new player in the women's sports scene: industrial manufacturers, specifically textile mills. You see, starting in the Meiji period and continuing through the Taisho and early Showa periods, large numbers of young women found jobs spinning silk in textile mills. Japan quickly became the largest supplier of raw silk in the world, and by 1896, the industry employed more than 590,000 female workers, compared to a mere 32,000 male workers. These factory workers, mostly very young, lived in dormitories on site and worked more than 14 hours a day. Their lives were hard, the labor conditions harsh, the factories filthy and dangerous. Following a 1924 expose, Joko Aishi, The Tragic Story of a Factory Girl, by former labor activist Hosoi Wakizo, the whole industry developed a reputation as a deeply unpleasant and unhealthy place for women to work. To dispel this reputation, the factories started organizing sports teams among their workers. Look how fit and energetic our employees are. See how healthy they are. With women's volleyball enjoying a surge in popularity at the time, it was the most natural thing in the world for these factories to start organizing volleyball teams. Up until around 1935, the All-Japan Volleyball Championships were dominated by a handful of girls' high schools, but starting in 1936, these were completely surpassed by the new factory teams. When the war ended, these corporate teams, there were more than 200 of them by this point, started their own league with its own All-Japan Corporate Championship. The most dominant of these was the team from the Dai Nippon Boseki factory in Kaisaku, near Osaka. Dai Nippon Boseki, shortened to Nichibo, already had 2 volleyball teams at different factories, but in 1953 they decided to combine their efforts and make a single team at the Kaisaku branch. After some early teething issues, the Kaisaku team started putting together major wins in 1955, taking first place in 3 of the 4 national-level tournaments. In '58, they swept all 4. Having secured their dominance over the domestic scene, the Nichibo Kaisaku team set their sights on the upcoming World Volleyball Championships, scheduled for 1960. But that meant abandoning the 9-player style of volleyball still prevalent within Japan, and adapting to the international 6-player standard. By this point, the Nichibo Kaisaku factory had developed a reputation as the employer of choice for talented young female volleyball players. Which is a weird thing to say, but there you have it. These players weren't just mascots with cushy sinecures to justify paying them to play sports. They were full employees in the textile mill. Their rigorous practice schedule was added on top of their factory shifts. That schedule was all-consuming. The factory workers lived in dormitories, sleeping 4 to a room, one volleyball player with 3 ordinary workers. A typical day for them started at 6 a.m. By 8, they were at their places in the factory, where they worked until noon. Training started immediately after lunch, with hours of taiso, body-strengthening exercises, and basic drills. The coach, who also worked in the factory, arrived just after 5 o'clock, and the real training began at 6 p.m., going until midnight or later still, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. They'd snack during breaks, but wouldn't really eat dinner until after training was over, and regularly got less than 3 hours of sleep a night. From a modern sports medicine perspective, this training schedule sounds bad, dangerous, downright abusive. Even at the time, it was harshly criticized. A Sports Illustrated article about the team was titled "Driven Beyond Dignity." The writer calls the coach's grim, wild-eyed intensity frightening. The labor union representing the factory workers protested, but to no avail. The coach was a man named Daimatsu Hirofumi, nicknamed Oni no Daimatsu, Daimatsu the Demon. Born in 1921, he started working at Nichibo after high school, but was drafted into the army and served as a company commander during the Impal campaign. The Japanese soldiers endured terrible conditions during the battle. Impal, fought from March to July 1944, was one of the Empire's worst defeats, and, at the time, the worst defeat in Japanese history. The casualty records for the battle are incomplete, but it's estimated that around 90,000 soldiers participated in the operation, with 60,000 of them fighting on the battlefield. This force would suffer more than 65,000 casualties during the battle, with one division suffering attrition as high as 84%. Daimatsu was assigned to the 31st Division, which lost more than 2/3 of its soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. His company was forced to live for months in the Burmese jungle, exhausted, starving, fighting desperately. Yet he survived, and somehow so did all of his men. It is often said that this experience changed his personality dramatically, and really, how could it not? When the surviving players from the Nichibo Kaizaku team were interviewed for a documentary in 2021, they remembered Daimatsu fondly despite the harsh discipline of his training methods. Many of the players had grown up without one or both of their parents, and saw the coach as a kind of surrogate father. One former player recalled that they used to talk about how he was the kind of man they would want to marry someday. In 1960, the Nichibo Kaizaku team represented Japan at the Volleyball Women's World Championships in Brazil, where they placed second, losing 3-1 against the Soviet Union in the final. Following this impressive showing, the team embarked on a European tour. They won every match, 22 of them in a row, and by the end of the tour, the world had begun to take notice. People started calling them the Typhoon from the East as they ran the tables on the teams in Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. They finished the tour with a revenge match against the Soviet team, and when the Nichibo Kaizaku team smashed through the Russians, they were given the nickname that would stick with them forever after, the Witches of the East. In 1962, they repeated that feat at the World Championships in Moscow, defeating the Soviets in the final on their own turf. Some of the witches wanted to stop at this point. They had achieved an incredible feat. They were tired. They were ready to move on to the next phase in their lives, to leave behind the world of sports and textile mills, to find husbands and settle down. But the 1964 Olympics were coming up. Tokyo would be hosting them, and volleyball would be included in the games for the first time. As the hosts, Japan had been allowed to add 2 sports to the Olympic curriculum. They had picked judo and, probably because of the fervor kicked off by the Witches' shocking international success, volleyball. The Witches were swamped with letters from fans urging them to keep playing, at least until the Olympics. Pressure from management and the Volleyball Federation was equally intense. They would simply have to keep going. The 1964 Olympics were treated as something of a coming-out party for the new post-war Japan. Success at the Games could show how far the country had come since its surrender. But then, in the finals for judo's open-weight category, Japan's Kaminaga Akio was pinned in Kesagatame, the scarf hold, by the giant Anton Giesink. That defeat, on the international stage, in a sport Japan itself had invented, was crushing, although perhaps not shocking. Giesink had already beaten Kaminaga at the World Championships. Still, It put intense pressure on the witches to repeat their victory over the Soviets. With the Crown Princess Michiko watching in the audience, and 67% of TVs in Japan tuning in, they crushed the Soviet team in the finals. Finally, the witches could rest. In 1966, after most of the original witches had retired, the Nichibo Kaizaku women's volleyball team finally lost a match. Since the start of their European tour in 1961, they had won 258 games in a row without a single loss. Like I said at the outset, we don't actually know whether Tomino had a particular volleyball team in mind when he gave Osaka his instructions. It is perfectly plausible that he was just thinking generically about women's volleyball. After all, it was and remains very popular in Japan. But a lot of that general popularity can be traced back to the witches, and it is no exaggeration to call them the most famous single volleyball team in Japan. Perhaps the most enduringly famous volleyball team, period. There are a couple of other reasons to think that the witches may have inspired the Shrikes. For one, their famous European tour brought the witches directly into the region where the Shrikes first encountered Uso and company. For another, the Shrikes' relationship to Commander Oliver bears more than a passing similarity to the oft-discussed relationship between the witches and their demon coach Daimatsu. And there is one more argument for tying the Shrikes directly to the witches rather than to a generic contemporary volleyball team, but unfortunately it depends on events that have not yet transpired in the show. So I will simply say that it has to do with the number of players the witches brought on their European tour compared to the number of players in a standard international volleyball match. I'll leave you to guess what I'm talking about, and maybe I'll remember to reveal it when we get there. And now I can tell you my other theory about why the Shrikes' transport aircraft are called setters. It's not just because they look like sandals called seta, it's also because setter, or seta in Japanese, is a position in volleyball, the one responsible for setting up attack plays. Kind of like how the setters get the attacking Shrikes into position for their attack plays.
Layers upon layers. The witches were also just massively influential in their time. The documentary that we watched about them, which was fantastic, by the way. If you're at all interested, watch this documentary. It's called The Witches of the East. It's on Criterion right now.
I'll include a link in the description. It's not actually called the Witches of the East. It uses a term that we don't really use for the East anymore.
The Orient?
Yes.
But in the aftermath of this original team's international success, there were manga, there was an extremely popular anime, although the anime was set at a high school. It was a high school girls volleyball team. Lots of very influential and popular media inspired by the athletic prowess and success of these women.
Given Tomino's age, there's no possibility that he was unaware of these women and their incredible accomplishments.
Next time on episode 10.20, Victory is Coming. We research and discuss episode 20 of Victory Gundam and Havana Syndrome. Behold our new super weapon. I call it the Big Cannon. Dr. Feel Genki. Grown-up business. VIP, very inspirational princess. Haro, you pervert. Tomino's singular obsession. The Big Cannon is helpless in the face of stomach hurty. Mom always told me not to stand too close to the microwave. Fighting blind. And why do the baddies always have a stock of fancy girls' dresses on their ships? Please listen to it.
It's formerly called the Clemmy Doctrine.
Hey, Captain, why do we do this? Oh, nobody knows. That's from generations ago.
It's just tradition. You know how navies are. Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. The recap music is Slow by Lloyd Rogers. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email hosts@GundamPodcast.com or look for links to our social media accounts on our website. And if you would like to support the show, please share us with your friends, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or support us financially at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. You can find links and more ways to help out at GundamPodcast.com/support. Thank you for listening. The Gundam fandom has been corrupted by wrong opinions, and the only way to purify ourselves is by exposing them to the light of day. Wrong opinions like, Queen Maria didn't abandon Shakti. She was just following the tried and tested Piccolo parenting method, where you leave the kid in the woods and trust that they'll figure it out themselves. And hey, you can't say that Shakti didn't turn out all right. This is not the right version of this research piece.
Nuts.
This is the old one. I have to go get the new one.
Well, you would have had to turn off that alarm anyway.
Yes!
If you hear the kitten, it's because, well, if you hear the kitten or hear more than the usual amount of ambient noise, it's because we cannot close the office door, because if we do, she cries outside the door.
The kitten. She is 18 years old. She is an old lady.
Yeah, an old lady kitten.
She has gravitas.
Not when she's begging.
She has a certain nobility to her begging. I have lived a long and hard life. Surely now, at the end, I deserve treats. Who knows how much longer I'll last? How many treats I have left in me to eat?
So basically, the same stuff my yaya said whenever we tried to get her to eat less cheese or drink less booze.
I don't know about booze, but Tigress would certainly like to eat more cheese.
I'm old. Are you gonna deny me life's pleasures now?
Don't worry, listeners. She gets plenty of treats. We are not denying this cat.
We just don't like to give her human food.
Which is, from her perspective, deeply offensive.
The one exception is hiding medication in a little piece of cheese. Everything is better with a little piece of cheese. The song Spoonful of Sugar should have been a little piece of cheese.
And yes, we know that cats are lactose intolerant. So am I. We give her the lactose-free cheese.
Do you know where she is?
Yes.
Okay.
She's right over there.
Okay. She won't stop at my lap. If I thought you would sit quietly in my lap, I would pull you up here, but you're gonna climb all over my desk and climb all over the audio equipment, and no, we're not having it. And she never wants like mid-afternoon pets. This is only when we're doing something.
Mm-hmm. Only when we're recording. Sometimes if I'm editing around now, she'll come over and hang out at my feet and claw my legs.
Be very
and be
demanding.
Like, hey, I can tell that you're doing something that isn't paying attention to me.
Two random thoughts, which maybe can go in the outtakes.
Hit me with them.
Some very literal shot composition happening when Juko is literally in between Oliver and Marben.
I loved that scene when Marbat says, it's Marben time, and then Marb's all over those guys.
Also, I want to know about that Zanskar guy who was like, these Vespa dudes are so soft.